You're sitting in a diner. You reach for the salt shaker. You flip it upside down, give it a few casual shakes over your fries, and put it back down. It costs you absolutely nothing. If you spill it, someone wipes it into a trash can without a second thought. It is the most mundane, invisible rock on the planet. But if you took that exact same handful of tiny white crystals and dropped it into a crowded market square 4,000 years ago, men would have literally killed you for it. Wars were fought over it. Empires were built on it. Millions of people spent their entire, agonizingly short lives enslaved in deep, pitch-black holes in the earth just to scratch it out of the rock. This is the story of salt. Not the seasoning, not the thing your doctor told you to cut back on, and definitely not just a cheap paper packet at the bottom of a takeout bag. We're talking about the only rock that human beings are biologically hardwired to eat, and how a deep, primal craving shaped the entire map of human civilization. Because here's the thing nobody thinks about when they pass the salt shaker. You are fundamentally just a very complicated walking aquarium. Hundreds of millions of years ago, when the earliest multicellular life decided to crawl out of the primordial ocean and try living on dry land, they faced a massive biological crisis. The cells in their bodies had evolved to function in a very specific environment, a warm, salty sea. To survive on land, they couldn't just leave the ocean behind. They had to figure out a way to trap a piece of it inside their own skin. Your blood, your sweat, your tears, they are all living evolutionary echoes of that ancient ocean. Your nervous system literally cannot send an electrical signal from your brain to your big toe without sodium and chloride ions. If your internal salinity drops too low, your muscles seize, your brain swells, and your heart stops beating. For early human hunter-gatherers, getting enough salt wasn't a problem. They got it naturally by eating the meat of animals that had already done the hard work of finding it. But then, roughly 10,000 years ago, humans stumbled into a massive lifestyle shift: agriculture. We stopped chasing wild game and started growing crops. And suddenly, our diet became almost entirely plant-based. Plants don't hold on to sodium. In fact, a diet of grains and vegetables naturally flushes sodium out of the human body. And right there, the ancient, hardwired biological panic button flipped on. Our brains developed an intense, driving, primal craving for a rock. Once humans started farming, salt transitioned from a biological necessity to the world's first currency. If you had salt, you could preserve meat. If you could preserve meat, you could survive the winter, feed an army, and conquer your neighbors. Without it, you died. The ancient world was completely mapped by salt. The oldest paved roads in Italy, the Via Salaria, weren't built for grand military parades. They were built to haul salt from the coast into Rome. In fact, Roman soldiers were frequently paid not in coins, but in a specific allowance of salt to preserve their rations. It's where we get the word salary. If a soldier was lazy, he wasn't worth his salt. In ancient China, the empire realized very early on that because everyone needed salt to stay alive, it was the perfect thing to tax. By the Han Dynasty, the monopoly on salt funded over half of the Chinese state's budget. It literally paid for the construction of the Great Wall. If you travel to Hallstatt, Austria, you can walk into salt mines that are over 3,000 years old. Deep inside these mountain caves, the salt air is so incredibly preserving that archaeologists found prehistoric wooden backpacks, leather shoes, and even the perfectly preserved body of an ancient miner from 300 BC, untouched by time. For thousands of years, salt was treated with absolute reverence. It was a luxury. In many indigenous cultures, it was used to seal sacred oaths and bless newborn children. You treated it with respect because it was hard to get, and it kept your community from starving. But over the last 2 centuries, industrial mining changed everything. We figured out how to blast millions of tons of it out of the earth effortlessly. We made it cheap. We made it ubiquitous. And then, we handed it over to commercial food scientists. See, Your brain is still operating on a prehistoric evolutionary program. It still thinks you are a hunter-gatherer who hasn't eaten salt in 3 weeks. When your tongue tastes salt, your brain releases a massive hit of dopamine, telling you, eat more of this. It keeps us alive. Modern processed food companies engineered a multi-billion-dollar trap out of that evolutionary bug. They realized that if you inject the perfect ratio of salt, fat, and sugar into a snack, what they explicitly call the bliss point, you can completely override the human body's natural mechanism for feeling full. What used to be a sacred shield against winter starvation was transformed into a hyper-palatable weapon designed to keep you eating long after you're full. The gap between a prehistoric farmer trading a week's worth of grain for a small pouch of salt crystals and a modern food corporation using it to maximize profit is a massive moral chasm. One looked at salt as life-saving infrastructure. The other looks at it as a mechanism for addiction. Both are dealing with the exact same rock. Almost nothing else is the same. So, the next time you taste a tear on your cheek, or wipe sweat from your brow on a hot day, or casually shake those white crystals over a plate of food, take a second to think about it. You aren't just eating a seasoning, you are participating in a 500-million-year-old biological contract. You are maintaining the tiny, ancient ocean that you've been carrying inside your cells ever since your ancestors first crawled out of the surf. History is beautifully absurd, and sometimes the most profound story on Earth is just sitting right there, in a cheap glass shaker, right next to the napkins.